but then I ended up seeing you a couple days later, like on campus. And so I did a little, and you didn't wave back. And then this happened several times and I was like, oh my God, she doesn't like me. And then later on, I found out that no, I'm just a terrible person because... Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Dylan Callier. I'm a physical therapist, and welcome to the New Medical Nomads podcast, where I get to document my journey as a medical traveler, as well as interview other experts within the traveling field. Now, the rules for the traveling game are constantly changing, so anything you hear on this show should be for entertainment purposes only. This is not legal, financial, or medical advice. Enjoy the show and safe travels. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. My name is Dylan. I am here today with Miss Jess Herren, Dr. Jess Herren. She's a traveling physical therapist, also from the same school that I went to, so she was a few years ahead of me. We've been very good friends for a long time. I've always kind of looked up to her. She was the student physical therapist organization at our school. She was the president. And so she has a lot of experience with leadership and really helped me along my journey throughout the collegiate years. But Jess, how are you today?
I'm doing great. And I look up to you and all the social media stuff. I know that's something new that I'm trying to get into. So you kind of inspired me in that arena. So hopefully I'll get that going here soon. Yeah.
It's definitely a learning curve with all the social media stuff, but it's pretty fun.
For sure.
Pretty fun. So Jess, do you want to tell everyone kind of a little background about yourself, how you got into being a traveling physical therapist? I know you're currently not traveling. So if you could just tell us where you've been, what you're doing now, and what you're looking to do in the future.
Sure. Awesome. So I graduated from Maryville University in 2014, and travel PT, that was actually what I started out doing right after PT school. So I just dove right into it. Since then, I don't want to discredit anything I'm going to say, but I did only do one travel PT assignment for about 6 months. I wish I was still doing it. It was a blast, but I did tons of research and talked to a lot of different people. So I do feel like, at least from the get-go, I have a lot of good basic knowledge on some things to look out for and what to do when you're interviewing for a travel PT position. That being said, I did that for about 6 months, and then I was applying for sports residencies. So I accepted a job working with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I was there for about a year doing pediatric sports, and then I tried to do sports residencies again the following year. And I ended up going to the University of North Dakota and completing a 1-year sports residency there. And then just recently, I completed that residency and accepted a position at a private practice clinic in Fayetteville, Georgia, so just south of Atlanta. So that's kind of where I graduated, where I have been since then, and where I am now. So.
Awesome. So you did a short stint doing traveling for about 6 months, and then found the residency that you were hoping to get into and got in there. So your career kind of went another way, but yes. I know you've been talking about potentially getting back into it eventually. But yeah, you were one of the first ones that kind of brought travel PT to my attention, and was one of the main reasons for me looking into it and getting all excited about it. During your travel time and getting involved, is there anything that you've learned during that amount of time that you wish you would have known at the beginning of your travel career?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that most people don't talk about, I've done a couple different presentations on travel PT and I've talked to a lot of people, is kind of what to do about the tax situation. So without it being too overwhelming to somebody that hasn't really looked into it, one of the big selling points for travel PT is this tax-free stipend that you get to take home that can cover housing and room and board, food, that sort of thing. So with that, it basically requires that you have a tax home somewhere that you are paying taxes to, and that's why your tax-free stipend is waived, because they're assuming that you're paying money for a house somewhere else while you're traveling, and then you're paying for your traveling expenses, or they're paying for your traveling expenses at the place that you're living. So that was one thing I didn't really know a whole lot about going into it. And I did find traveltax.com is a good resource for that. And I spoke to a lady from there. I remember my first assignment. I didn't really utilize it my first assignment because it was short term, but I have gotten advice from several people, tax people, that if you are going to continue traveling, that it's a good idea to look into. So I think that's a resource I didn't really know anything about. And then my mom was actually the one that kind of prompted me, and she's like, have you thought about what you're going to do about taxes this year? You're filing in 3 different states. And I'm like, haven't, and I didn't understand the tax-free stipend. I just thought you selected you had a tax home, and I did because I'd lived in Illinois and worked there the year before. But anyway, so that's something that, it's kind of completely off the wall, random, but that's something that I didn't really know about that I feel I know a lot more about now. So it's just a good thing to ask your recruiter when you are accepting a position and talking about the stipend and how much you're going to be making as far as salary goes, just to kind of field those questions.
Yeah. I actually got to reach out to traveltax.com, or their company, not too long ago. And they're really good. So if you are in a position where you're looking to have some questions that need answered about taxes and traveling and things like that, you can call them, and it's absolutely free. The only time they ever charge is when you actually file through them or fill out some type of paperwork. But basically all questions, you can call them, set an appointment. Sometimes they had me send like a really simple question through email because it's easier for them to answer. But they are super helpful and just wanting to get information out there and make sure everybody's safe and having a good time with their travels, so that they can not worry about the financial stuff and worry about potential IRS things coming back at them later on.
I totally agree.
How'd you get into travel PT?
So basically my last 3 rotations at school, I felt like I was kind of doing traveling PT because, there were 3 months each, and all 3 of my rotations were out of state in a different place. So I got a taste of travel PT because I went to a place where I didn't know anybody. I had to find a place to live, find a way to pay for that rent, learn the area, and all that goes along with moving to a new place. So I kind of had my head in PT school. Everybody kind of knows what thinks they know what they want to do. And then sometimes you get there and you're like, that's not really for me. So I thought about travel PT early on in school, and then I ended up switching gears, and I had a really great clinical, and I was like, this is where I want to work. I want to work here forever, want to move here. The position didn't pan out. I didn't get the job I wanted. So I was back at home studying for boards, and travel PT came back in my head. And on one of my rotations, a friend had said, hey, I had this girl that did travel PT and use this agency. You should give them a call. So I talked to the girl. She had me sold because I didn't know where I wanted to work. I wasn't even sure what setting I wanted to work in. I was pretty sure I wanted to do sports, but then I also kind of like developmental peds. So I kind of bounced back and forth between those. And for me, travel PT was a perfect opportunity to try different, like in my head, it was a way to try different settings with no commitment, essentially, because you can get out of any contract if you need to. But even if you didn't like it, 3 months isn't really that long time in the big picture. So it's I considered it low commitment. And then you also just gain experience from going different places, meeting different people and different therapists. So for me, that was the best option at that point in my life. So at the same time I was taking boards, I was talking to about 3 or 4 different travel PT agencies, and I was interviewing for jobs every couple days. And finally I found one that clicked. I was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I was pretty picky with what I wanted because I knew I wanted outpatient. I just wasn't sure where. And I ended up just getting right into it. So
awesome. When you were a student trying to find places to live, how did you do that?
So I had several different resources. Now I think everybody knows about it, but when I was in PT school, it was still kind of new. But I used Airbnb for a couple places. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, every now and then you'll have clinical sites that have clinical instructors that can recommend short-term housing or things like that. So one of mine was a friend of a friend that I lived with, and then one was through Airbnb, and then the couple that I stayed with actually ended up becoming like part of my family, so which is awesome. And then one of them was a clinical instructor in her family, so they helped me find a place to stay when I was on that rotation. So those are all options, and I know I've seen a lot of posts on the student Facebook page now that they say, "Hey, I'm going to this place. Does anybody know housing?" So that's obviously technology provides a great resource for finding a place to stay.
Absolutely, yeah. I think even just a few years ago, there's a lot more information about housing and what you can do and where you can go online. I've seen it for not only physical therapy, but also travel nursing and things, other professions. But when I was bouncing around for my clinicals, I always get asked how would I find the positions, places that I got into. And I would actually just, wherever the clinical was, I would look in the surrounding area and I would find a PT school in that area. And then I would email their front office lady and be like, hey, is it okay? Here's my situation. I'm a poor college kid, a poor PT student. Yeah. Can you please help me? And they're usually very sweet and very nice. Actually, I would call them first. And so I would explain my situation. Usually they would say, yeah, no problem. Just send me an email with all your information and what you're looking for, and we'll just forward it to all our students. And so then I would send the email, it would get forwarded out. And then when I did that, I usually got about 10 to 15 responses about people either looking for a roommate or, they were somebody to pay. Actually, one of mine ended up being just a family that wanted somebody else in the house and loved housing students. And so they actually didn't charge me anything. But that's how I was able to find places to live during those clinicals. Because as a student, it's a different game because you don't really have that many resources or
I totally agree.
A recruiter helping you out along the way. What is a myth that you have heard about travel PT that maybe is not so accurate?
Ooh, this is a good one. I think this really depends on who you ask and how many travel assignments they've done. So I'm not going to lie. I completely lucked out on my first assignment. I ended up at a clinic with 6 or 7 newer graduates, within the past 5 years, and then an owner that had been there for about 14 years and had been a PT for about that long. And so I feel like I ended up at an awesome place. And the number one thing people told me is there's a reason there's a position open. And it's because there's something unethical going on, or if the boss is terrible, all these things. And I definitely believe in some cases that's true, and it depends on what company you work for. But in my experience, I worked with Delta healthcare providers, and most places that I interviewed for or places that I reached out to, it wasn't that they couldn't keep people because they were bad practice. It was because a lot of them were located in rural settings. So I ended up in Emporia, Kansas, which is a triangle between Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City. And there wasn't honestly a whole lot to do there, but you were only 2 hours from Kansas City. It was a great clinic, great coworkers. So there was nothing wrong with the place at all, just that it was a little bit from a city. And a lot of times when you get travel PT emails, you'll see, Atlanta, Georgia. And then if you read the details, the fine print, it'll be only an hour or 2 hour drive to Atlanta, Georgia. So I think the misconception is that there is going to be something terrible going on. And if you do have a sense that, there's a reason this place can't keep people after your interview, you just need to ask the right questions about productivity standards, how many patients a day you treat, how much time you get to treat those patients. And I think all of those things can kind of let you know if it's a red flag or not. And then at that point, you decide whether or not to take the assignment. But I think that is the big myth I've heard is none of the places I interviewed for, it didn't seem like they had problems with management or any ethical issues or dilemmas. It was more just that they were in a rural area and they didn't have PT schools around, and people that left there to go to PT school didn't always return to that area. So, and that also depends. That's different when you're looking at the outpatient setting versus the SNF setting versus acute care. So those all vary. So I'm just speaking from my experience and then the experience of other people. I know is some places just they can afford, obviously they can afford to pay a PT, a traveler's salary, so they can afford a PT, but it's more just maybe not being in a great location. And if you're willing to, travel and go far on the weekends, you can see tons of stuff, even if you do it up in a rural setting. So I think that's the biggest misconception, for my opinion, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. So obviously you're a travel physical therapist, and we touched on it a little bit, but when you were in that interview process, traveling interviews are a little bit different, where it's not so many questions coming at you, but you want to be a little more aware of the questions you should ask the company. What are some questions that you asked to make sure that you got the specific spot that you wanted?
As far as the recruiter or the actual interview for the position? Like when I was talking to the
more recruiter? For the position, but also if you have any questions that you ask the recruiter, we could do that too.
Right. So I straight up asked the recruiter, I pretty much told them exactly what I wanted and said, if you can't find something for me like this, I'm going to check another company or try another place. So I was upfront with him about that. And I think one of the biggest questions I had was, what do I do if there's something unethical? Just as a new grad, I heard that. So I worried about, coming into a situation where there was something unethical going on. And so I just asked them, what do I do if that arises? Who do I talk to? Am I able to get out of the contract? I kind of just wanted more details about what that contract entailed and if I could get out of a contract if I wasn't happy somewhere and how the money affected that, those types of things. For the job specifically, I definitely asked about productivity standards, Medicare, what their payer mix was. So Medicare, private practice, workers' comp, what types of patients they saw, pediatrics. So a lot of the general questions, but then I think something additional I asked that you probably wouldn't ask in a normal job interview was about, well, you might ask this too, I guess, if you're a new grad, if you weren't familiar with this, but do you have somebody at your location willing to mentor me? And I think that's actually another myth, is that a lot of people say if you travel, you won't get mentored. Mm-hmm. I may have just lucked out. Like, I ended up at a place with 6 or 7 mentors, which was awesome. Yeah. But I asked that in all of my interviews and kind of said, how many PTs do you have working? Am I going to be the only PT? What's your clinic like? Some of them, I wanted them to show me the clinic, and you can do video. You can do video interviews now like this, and they can show you the setting so you can see exactly what it looks like. But I asked questions like that too when I couldn't, if I couldn't see it, like, how is your clinic set up? How many PTs would I be working with? One place I found out that I would be the only PT. I would be doing home health, inpatient, outpatient, and acute. And they're like, oh, there's an OT that can help you. And I'm like, woo, as a new grad, that was probably, that might have worked for some people. That was not the ideal situation for me. So just asking what support you'll have as a new grad PT. And then I straight up asked them, are you willing to mentor a new grad? Like, this is what I have to offer you. I have great patient care skills. I love to learn, and I'm a super hard worker. I have great work ethic, but I'm new. I'm not experienced. And do you have somebody that could kind of help me, or people that I could, ask questions of? And just like, yeah, sure. So most places had 1 or 2 people that were like, oh, we've had a traveler before. We know the ropes, that sort of thing.
Got it. When you were getting that mentorship, was it a formal mentorship where you kind of said, can we get like 5 minutes a week or something like that? Just sit down and ask any questions, or was it just kind of as you went?
It was definitely as I went. I think I could have had the opportunity to do that formal, but it was more like, I'd be in an eval and I'd come across something I'd never seen before. And I'd be like, give me a minute. And I'd run out to the gym and find somebody like, okay, I just saw this. What does this mean? What do I do about it? Or, just rules about billing and things like that. So it was more like everybody was there were so many people that were good resources. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of would ask. So not formal, but I feel like it still is valuable, honestly, especially after coming out off a residency where you do have formal mentoring, even though that was the part I appreciated the most. And sometimes the unstructured mentoring is nice too. If I just have one question I need a yes or no answer to, then it's a lot easier. So
because that's one of the problems that I've seen with some of the new grads coming out, is that they want that mentorship. They want to, kind of accelerate their career and fast track and learn those skills, but they get to the clinic and the clinic's too busy, and then they never really get the opportunity to sit down and ask those questions. So I think finding that formal mentorship definitely has its perks, but it sounded like in your situation it was almost a little bit better to have it informal.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool. Very cool. One of the recent questions I've learned to ask when talking with a recruiter recently, there's been some posts going on about recruiters not giving you the name of the clinic that is interested you or the hospital until you officially say, yes, I'm interested. And then you set up an interview with the manager. Uh-huh. There's kind of a big push from the health profession side where they're saying, no, that's not how this is going to work. We should be able to know which clinic you're talking about so that we can Google them, look them up, things like that. But actually recently, Dr. Jody James, who's been on this show, she said she was a neuro PT in an inpatient rehab. She was able to go on Google a hospital and check out their Medicare files to see if there's been any fraudulent charges or anything like that. So she got a little heads up if she was going to end up in an unethical situation. And one of those examples that she was giving me, she actually did find out that there was a lot of fraudulent things going on with that hospital. And so she neglected to sit down with that interview.
Right. That's definitely that's something. Another thing though to consider, I guess I look at the flip side too, is I think one of the reasons they do that is to protect them because they're making money off you, right? If they place you. So if you find out the name of the place and you email them and say, hey, I heard you guys were looking for somebody, you might get a better benefit package, or you might actually get paid more, or, so I think it's definitely good to know ahead of time, but you also, like you said, don't want to necessarily commit to sit down, and do an hour-long phone interview with someone that you're like, well, I don't know anything about them. I have no idea what to expect. So I think there are questions you can ask to figure that out, but I can see both sides, because that's definitely they don't tell you until you say, oh, I want to do an interview. They'll just give you a location and tell you what city it's closest to. And even then you can sometimes figure it out. But that's what I've heard from, because I straight up asked my recruiter that, and he was kind of like, well, we reach out and find these places that need people, and they're paying us a fee, and we're providing them with somebody hopefully reliable, and kind of weeding out the ones that aren't really maybe a great fit before they even get to the interview. So definitely that's something though I hadn't heard about. But I do know that's one of the reasons why they don't tell you up front.
And I think we're both similar to, whereas I don't think the majority of people are actually quote unquote bad people. So I don't think that the bad recruiters are necessarily trying to be bad or trying to pull the wool over their eyes, but maybe there's some incentive from higher up, or there's a company policy and they're not allowed to kind of distribute that information.
Right.
But you can definitely, if you feel like you're getting put in a situation where you're not getting that information that would be beneficial to you, or might end up kind of putting you in an awkward situation later, you can always go with another recruiter, another company.
Yep. At the end of the day, their job is to place someone at those locations. That's what they're getting paid to do. So,
so Jess, you have an interesting situation. We can kind of talk about how it affected you finding a place as a student, and then also for your stint as a traveling physical therapist. But did you want to talk about your eyesight?
Sure. Yeah. So I basically have a visual impairment, and one of the biggest limiting factors is that it prevents me from driving. So that was one of the things that personally held me back from travel PT earlier on in PT school, is that I was like, how am I ever going to find a place to live where I can walk to work, or how am I going to find people to help me? And mind you, this was before Uber and Lyft and all those awesome resources they have now. But then when I did my rotations, I kind of went on a limb, and I was like, I'm just going to try to do my rotations in different places, and once again, see if I could do this. And I have a very strong faith, and I just feel like I was incredibly blessed. And each place I went to, I found people, whether it was a clinical instructor, a neighbor, somebody through a church that was willing to help me out with transportation. So I can say I've lived in 7 different states the past 3.5 years, and I've never really had a want for a ride. Like, I've almost always had somebody I can reach out to or go to. And as far as housing goes, I just feel like I had to put in a lot more legwork, because a lot of places, the travel companies, they'd say, oh, we have a place about 20 minutes away. And ideally for me, that just wouldn't work. The closer I could be to a location, the more convenient it was for me. So that was when I started looking at Airbnb, because they give you kind of an approximate area, and I would ask them, how close are you to this therapy clinic? And that way I'd get an idea of what I would be looking at. And I would always go to the place before and visit, and just see what the layout of the town was. I've always been able to do that when looking for a place to live. So it definitely was a big hurdle, because I tell the recruiter straight up, I need a place to live. I want a place that's close. I can't drive. I tell the clinic that, and I didn't really ever have any worries. I felt pretty comfortable in all my interviews. People interviewing me had just said, I don't need really any special accommodations, other than I want somewhere close to the clinic, and just know that I'm probably going to be walking. So that was, like I said, just a big hurdle. I feel like that was something that could have kept me from doing travel PT. And definitely, I was super nervous anytime I went to a new city. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get to work? Where am I going to, how am I going to get to church? How am I going to get to the grocery store? All these things. And it just always ended up kind of falling into place. So, and when I moved to Atlanta, that was definitely a different scenario. I still didn't know anybody there at the new place I moved to. But I ended up using Uber at that time. So I found Uber was a great way to get around. So between Airbnb, Uber, and then just like the kindness of strangers, I ended up never having a problem, which was awesome. So
Awesome. Was it ever, is that something that you kind of thought was going to limit you as you were going into this? Or were you just like, I'm just going to do this. It's not going to hold me back, and I'm going to, live the life I want to live it. Did you ever feel intimidated?
Yes and no. I definitely, when I would ask people, about places, and they wouldn't give me the exact name of the clinic, but they gave me the town, the first thing I would do is go and see, do they have public transportation? What are the reviews on the public transportation? I do Google image, the Google map. This is so sad. I don't even know what it's called. The Google satellite thing, I guess, to see if there were sidewalks.
Okay.
And that sort of thing. So before I even did the interview, I pretty much looked at a place, and if a lot of the places I looked at had a college, so I'm like, oh, college town should be pretty walkable. There should be plenty of resources. And so that was something where once I did that, I felt better. But there was some places, like I think there was a place, it was on an Indian reservation in, I think, Michigan maybe, or Wisconsin, one of those places up north. And I remember looking at the map and being like, no can do. So there was, in some cases, I wasn't necessarily intimidated by it, but it was like, I was realistic. Like, this is a place it's probably not going to work. Whereas, a college town, I'm like, oh, this will probably work. And then after going and visiting it, then obviously I was reassured. But there were definitely some leaps of blind faith where I just hoped I would find a place to live and somewhere close and a safe area. So.
So I'll kind of tell the story of us first meeting. I was a freshman in school when we first.
Oh no, do I remember this?
Yeah. April Winthy introduced us, and you're like so friendly. You're like the nicest person, and we were chatting, talking. I had so many questions, that freshman year, you don't know what's going on. You want to do the best you can. But then I ended up seeing you a couple days later, like on campus, and so I did a little, and you didn't wait back. And then this happened several times, and I was like, oh my God, she doesn't like me. And then later on, I found out that, no, I'm just a terrible person because you couldn't see me as we were on the sidewalk. But
I think everybody has that. Everybody has that story with me, I think, for the most part. Most people that have met me have a similar story.
Is that something you had to tell or anything that has affected your kind of interview process with the actual clinic? Is that something you make, aware to them, or do you usually keep that until you get the position and let them know?
I definitely feel it out. It's definitely a personality. If I feel the person is like compassionate, we have a good rapport established, I might mention it slightly, but I just breeze right over it because it's not a big deal. I've dealt with it my whole life. And so it's something that I don't volunteer, but if it works, like, for example, if they ask a question about, tell us a difficult situation you've encountered or tell us an obstacle you've had to overcome in life, there's no greater example that I could give, that justifies kind of and shows who I am as an individual and as a practitioner. So definitely it's something I don't disclose up front unless it directly impacted patient care, I would. But if it doesn't impact my job, which it really doesn't, other than transportation, then I won't typically say anything unless they ask a specific question or, the opportunity presents itself, basically.
Got it.
And if I feel like they're, somebody that's not going to hold it against me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I know because of, I think that's influenced I know you're very crafty and you make a lot of things and that you really enjoy that. And I've spent multiple nights at your place trying to bake cookies or something like that.
Christmas cookies for PT Club.
I don't know if I ever told you this story. I think it was the cookie night, and I was leaving, and they were doing a stop, like a check stop for DUIs, like drunk driving, along the interstate. And so here I am, college kid, heading back home around midnight, 1 a.m., whatever it was. And I have this officer come up with his flashlight in my window, and it's really bright. He's right in my eyes. He's asking me all these questions, what are you doing out late this night? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? It's well, it's just, at school, heading back home. PT student, don't really have much of a life. I don't know, your eyes are really squinting. It's well, sir, you got the flashlight right in my eyes. And so, I don't know. That was just something funny. But when you were going to those new places, I know you do a lot of crafts and a lot of indoor activities, but you're also very sporty. So can you tell us kind of when you're at a new place, what are some things that you usually do when you're still trying to get to know people, find friends, things like that?
I am an avid runner, so I always look for a running group. And actually, out of my travels, I became a runner and ended up going from running a 5K to a 10K to a half marathon to a full marathon, all in a span of a year and a half. Wow. And that was because of people I met at running clubs, and actually a couple that I found through Airbnb I lived with. They turned me into a marathoner. That was one of the things I did. Running helped me get to know people. It also helped me get to know the locations, like, as far as knowing roads, which places to avoid, which places you might want to frequent more often. Running was a great way to do that. And then I also would go the first week I was there, usually that first Sunday, I'd research before I got there about 3 or 4 churches. And then I pretty much at every location I was in, I was pretty heavily involved in a church. And it wasn't a travel assignment. That's actually how I met my fiance the second time I was in Atlanta. So kind of a cool story. That's why I'm not traveling currently and why I might not be going back for a while. So being involved in church and then running, like doing a running group, was how I met a lot of great people. So those were the 2 big things. And then, like I said, my one travel assignment I did have, most of the people there were my age, so we were pretty active. We started running together. We would swim together. I had someone trying to turn me into a swimmer, which I haven't done a triathlon yet, but it's on my list. And then we would ride bikes together. So it was a very community atmosphere of the clinic. So even my coworkers, that was a place that I would use to get, a way I would use to get acquainted with the location. But I would definitely say running and going to different churches was the biggest 2 ways that I would get to know a place. So as I traveled.
Got it. What are some books, podcasts, personalities that you follow? This could be travel related, or this could be just something that you're interested right now. But where do you go for like information? I know you're also just kind of coming out of residency, so most of your free time has been research articles. But
so I tend to read, like when I did research articles, I spent a lot of time looking at stuff that Rob Mansky had out of Wichita. So he was one of my coworkers was a student of his. So I got a lot of articles from him. As far as podcasts go, I haven't delved into that world as much as I'd like. I see tons of them on the student Facebook page and like bookmark them, like to review later. So I wouldn't say I have a particular podcast blog. When I did travel PT, I did find several blogs to follow that were all pretty short-lived. And I know there is one on there has been one that's been frequenting the student DPT page that lately. So I haven't checked that out yet. I am going to get in more into like the pain science. I want to do some more reading into that. So there are a couple different pain science books that are on my to-do list. And then as far as travel PT goes, I can't remember the name of it. I just gave a presentation on travel PT at UND, but the name's slipping me. But there is a website that has lots of resources as far as travel PT goes. So I can get that to you if you want to post it with the video. That way that's available.
Yeah, we can plug it in the show notes. Do you remember some of those blogs? I imagine they're pretty probably physical therapy specific for traveling.
Yes. One of them is no longer functioning. And then 2 of them just had a couple entries. One of them, I should still have the list somewhere. And it was back when I had a WordPress, because I started a travel PT blog. I only made 2 entries because I got so busy with things, and then I stopped doing travel PT, but I was still moving and traveling. So I kind of switched gears with that, but I can definitely look those up on WordPress.
And I'll plug those down below. That would be good. You mentioned pain science, and I know I forget the title of the actual podcast, but if you go to ptpodcast.com, it's in the same group as PT Inquest, which is what I listen to for all my research. I think it's like pain and sensibility or something like that, but it's a lady on there, and she goes a lot into like the pain research and things like that. So that could be a really easy resource for you to scratch that itch of pain science.
I appreciate that.
No problem. For somebody who was kind of in your position where you weren't sure if you wanted to do this travel physical therapy thing, you didn't know if you wanted to be a medical traveler, maybe they have some type of impairment that they're worried is going to impact their career, what would you tell that person who's kind of on the fence of becoming a medical traveler?
I would say, why not? Really, I think the only valid reason for not doing it is if you're in a serious committed relationship and feel like you can't do long distance, or if you're married and have kids and can't pick up, your life every 3 months and move to a new place. I really don't think there's a reason not to. I think you grow so much as a person and as a professional. You might not build as much experience from seeing like the full continuum of care, because you don't necessarily as a traveler, depending on how long your assignments are, which can impact your growth as a professional. But just there's so much knowledge that comes from being in multiple different places and multiple different settings. And I think it makes you more marketable as a clinician. And I think it says, speaks volumes to like your patient care skills and just ability to establish rapport with people and personal skills. I really can't think, other than those two reasons, having a family and then being in a serious committed relationship, that you shouldn't do it, just because it's such a wonderful opportunity. And the money for me was great, but it wasn't even that. It was just kind of the experience as a whole that made it so alluring to me, like as a new grad.
Did you, when you were, so we went to the same school, and I imagine that we talked to some of the same people, receive a little bit of the same kind of pushback of maybe you shouldn't travel fresh out of school. What were some of the horror stories that you heard? And then if the ones that you did hear, how did they kind of handle that as a healthcare professional and then with their company?
There are a couple. I heard just, a couple ethical ones, like maybe not appropriately billing or seeing more patients than you're supposed to, or inappropriately using like PTAs and texts, that sort of thing. And most of them, well, I say most, I only know like 3 specific stories that I can think of, but most of them just talked to the recruiter and just said, hey, this is something I don't like, don't feel right about it. And you can encounter those settings in any job. Like that's not just specific to travel PT. But when I asked that question to the recruiter, if this would help, when I asked them what to do if an unethical situation arose, they just said, you just talk to us. You come talk to us, and we have a legal team. All the travel agencies, most of them, at least that I talked to, had a legal advising team that would be able to help you as far as, is this something that's really unethical? Are you just not used to it because it's a different area, or you're a new grad? Those sorts of questions. And I know that's a really hard situation to be into. So my advice is to ask all the questions in the get-go, so that you don't end up in that situation, having to make those decisions and decide whether or not to say anything or to keep doing your job. So an important thing to remember is just that your license is on the line. But I think I wouldn't say it was something unethical, but I know just one girl just had a really bad experience because she got thrown into somebody else's caseload really quickly. They didn't kind of take the time to build up the caseload, and she was miserable. Like she was just seeing too many patients and was having a hard time keeping up. And she just said something to the manager and just said, hey, listen, I'm a new grad. Like I'm seeing too many patients. And they actually addressed it. I don't even think they involved the travel agency. I think she told me they just addressed it like on site and got it resolved. And I guess that's another myth that I've heard too, is that you're going to be thrown right in. You have to think on your feet. And in some scenarios that's true, but several of the people I talked to before I made the leap for travel PT said, they got orientation, and I did. At my job, I started seeing patients maybe the second day, but the first day they just got me familiar with the clinic. The PTs let me set in on a few evals to see how they did their evals, check out their documentation system. And by the end of the week, I think I was seeing maybe 3 or 4 patients a day. And the next week I had a full caseload. So depending on what setting you're going into, I think that can be adjusted. But that was one of the horror stories I heard, was just kind of, being thrown into it and not being able to handle the caseload and the clients, and just taking over for another PT is really hard in and of itself, regardless of if you're a traveler or not. So, yeah.
Got it. It was probably a year ago that I called you, and I was talking to several different companies and asking you a bunch of travel PT questions. And one of the things that you brought up is that maybe I should have looked into an outpatient, not necessarily a clinic, but an outpatient setting that was within the hospital. And you were saying how, because of the reimbursement, that you see kind of like less patients than you might with a typical outpatient clinic. Could you kind of describe that a little bit? Because I know you were kind of pushing that side of things versus just going to a typical outpatient clinic.
Yeah. So I had, even outside of travel PT, 3 of the jobs that I've had have been in a clinic, outpatient clinic that was owned by a hospital or a company contracted through a hospital. And I just found I find that those patients, they see less volume. It seems like I would see a patient every half hour for about an hour, or 30 minutes to an hour. Other places I would see patients 45 minutes. So I would typically, I would kind of ask them, say, hey, I want an outpatient setting, but I don't want one that's crazy busy. And I just found when I was researching that it seemed like most places I talked to that were outpatient, but affiliated with a hospital, they seem to have lighter schedules. So I don't know what that says about the institution as a business, or if it, because it was non-for-profit. I don't really know about that side of things. I just know that seemed to be more fitting for me as opposed to a busy outpatient clinic. And I don't think that many outpatient private practice clinics, I could be wrong, but I didn't see many outpatient private practice clinics that, could afford travel PT. I feel like that's usually something that's not in the budget. So in most of the outpatient ones I encountered anyway were through like a hospital system.
Okay.
So.
And that would make sense. I didn't even think about that with, that would make sense. I didn't think about that with private practices, maybe not having the resources to reach out and get a contact.
Absolutely. Yes, paying all that extra money.
Right. But yeah, so if you are at least on the physical therapy side of things, a new grad, and you're worried about potentially getting thrown into a quote unquote exercise mill where you're just seeing a large volume of patients, maybe a good route would be to go to an outpatient that was affiliated with the hospital or located within the hospital.
Agreed.
And then for my last question, so you talked about how you were able to utilize Uber and Airbnb and all these like phone apps to kind of help you along with your journey. Are there any other items or apps or anything that you bought that really helped you along your path as a medical traveler? So any phone apps, any items, anything like that?
I have a few. One of the first ones, most people have probably heard of TripAdvisor by now. That just kind of shows you different restaurants and attractions in the area. Mm-hmm. And another more, I think, lesser known one is called Road Trippers. Have you ever heard of that or used it? Okay. So I think it's obviously, as it sounds, I think it's more for road tripping. Like you can put a start point and then a destination point and pull up like attractions, food, museums, natural resources. And then along the way, all these little dots pop up that show you like where those things are in your route. So I actually use that too when I got to a town. So it's similar to TripAdvisor, but sometimes it had extra things that you wouldn't think about. And I use that actually kind of on all my travels period. Like anytime I go vacation or go on a road trip, I'm like, oh, what can we stop and see along the way that's unique? So that was a great resource, and that was absolutely free. So that was probably one of my best travel PT apps, was to get to know a new place, was to use that. And then obviously using Facebook, looking at events in the area and things like that for places to go, things to do, running groups, like meetup group type things. So so those would be, the big two. And then I also used iOrtho, which is a app that I found as a good resource in the clinic, especially as a new grad, for reviewing like special tests and there are special tests and mobilization techniques, joint mobilization techniques for the different parts of the body. And I think I paid like $5 or $6 originally for it. Okay. And it's called iOrtho, but you can expand it, I think, and there's like maybe a $49 version. I haven't used it recently, but I still keep it on my phone just in case. I'm like, oh, I need to do the special test and like the elbow. Like, the elbow. And I want to refer to a special test for the elbow. So I use that several times as opposed to asking another clinician. I just review it myself. So it's easier than a textbook. And not that I'm lazy, but in the to have 5 seconds to just pull it up really quick and go to the elbow and do the special test.
Do you know the iOrtho, is that available for like Android and other phones other than iPhone, iPad?
I think, let me see. Yes, it is.
Cool.
Yes, it's Android, and I gave a smartphone in service one time at a clinic, and I'm like 99% sure it was both Apple or available through the App Store and through Android.
Gotcha. Well, awesome. Do you use any apps for your running?
I do. I'm on the Nike bandwagon. I know a lot of people use Map My Run, but I just started using Nike, and once my mileage count started getting up there, I just couldn't bear myself to switch. And I like seeing the routes. I love maps, so I go back and I look at my route and see, what other roads could I have gone upon? And I've heard that Map My Run does the same thing, but the Nike Run one also syncs with Nike Training Club, which has a bunch of workouts that actually provide great feedback for like correct exercise form, which is awesome. Okay. So they sync up together. So that's mainly why I use that.
Very, very cool. All right, Jess, did you have anything else you wanted to tell the listeners here today?
No, if you made it this far, awesome. I know Dylan knows I love to talk, but I also love to share knowledge. And I feel like if somebody would have given me this information as a traveler, I would have been a lot more confident And I would have maybe planned to do it a little bit sooner instead of being put off by just the lack of resources and people saying, oh, not a good idea as a new grad. And I experienced the opposite. So maybe I was just the anomaly. I don't know. But I was very, very fortunate. And I definitely, even just recently, I've kind of looked back into it when I was relocating back to Georgia, just to something to do in the meantime while I was trying to find a good full-time job, and one ended up kind of falling into my lap, which is awesome. But I miss the travel life. I think I probably could have done it for a long time. And I feel like I have, because even though I haven't been travel assignments, I've never stayed somewhere longer than a year due to residencies and different travel positions. So anyway.
Well, I definitely don't think you're the anomaly. Everybody I've talked to done it fresh out of school or even just traveling in general. All of them have said, just go for it and just do it.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, for the listeners, if you want to reach out to Dr. Jess Herren, join our Facebook group, New Medical Nomads online. You'll be able to, kind of reach out to her, and I'm sure she'll answer any questions there, and you can just tag her in a post. If you're looking for the next episodes coming up, go to the New Medical Nomads podcast, or if you want the information sooner, before I officially launch the episodes, you can always go to YouTube and subscribe to the channel where you find all these episodes there. I'll be uploading them there first, and then usually a week or two later, I will be officially launching it to where I put it on all the different Facebook pages and different routes to get it out to the listeners. But thank you so much, Jess. I appreciate you being on the show.
It was awesome. You're doing great, Dylan.
Well, thank you.